I'm Hog, this is the dice. I can't be arsed making a hogwash pun right now. Today we're going to be talking about whether or not the lack of female representation in the works of j.r.r. Tolkien meant he was sexist. The short answer is yes. But fuck short answers. Let's get obsessive and weird! It's true that Tolkien's two main novels had little to no female representation, but the problem with judging Tolkien's work on The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings is twofold. One, they are not his main body of work by a long shot. Two, he did not consider his novels to be his most important work. Tolkien's desire was to create a mythology and a world that had its own cultures, languages, geography, and long backstory. It was his intention not to write stories about this world himself, but to create a world in which other writers may write stories of their own. If he had been born a few decades later, he would have written source books for Dungeons and Dragons, and they would have been amazing. His true love was world building. And if you really want an understanding of Tolkien's world and Middle-earth, then you're much better off reading the Silmarillion than you are reading Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. Within the Silmarillion we see Lúthien, Melian, we see the origins of Galadriel, we also see the ill-fated Nienor, the vile Thuringwethil, and loathsome Ungoliant. All women, or at least females in the cases of Thuringwethil and Ungoliant, who shaped the history of Middle-earth and the nigh heavenly Valinor from the very beginning. And there's many more besides. And that's not even taking into consideration the female Valar, who were essentially goddesses. The tale of Beren and Lúthien is a particularly good example of women with power and agency. Lúthien is the daughter of the elf king Thingol and the Maya Melian. She falls in love with the human Beren, who begs her father her hand in marriage. Thingol, being kind of a dick, grants the request, but demands a Silmaril as dowry. At this point in the history of Middle-earth, the Silmarils have been stolen by Morgoth. This guy. If you don't know who Morgoth is, you don't understand how big a deal that is. I'll put it like this. Morgoth was Sauron's boss. He was the most powerful of the Valar, who were essentially gods. And he was the guy who woke up one morning and went, I think I'll invent evil today. So yeah, Morgoth was a bad dude. Beren agrees to this, because he's a badass. And Lúthien runs away from home to help Beren steal a Silmaril from the crown of the guy who invented evil, because she's also a fucking badass. Lúthien and Beren save each other's lives pretty frequently throughout the story. At one point, Lúthien saves Beren from Sauron and destroys Sauron's fortress by singing a pretty song. Because fuck having to do it the masculine way, Lúthien motherfucking Tinuviel is a feminine as fuck badass. They eventually get captured by Morgoth, but that's okay, because Lúthien sings a lullaby and uses that to put the guy who invented evil to sleep. Fast forward a bit. Beren has died. Lúthien then decides to die. She decides to die of old age, which does not fucking happen for elves. But fuck you, she's Lúthien Tinuviel. You cannot tell her what to do. So she decides to die and kicks her way into human heaven and fucking makes them return herself and Beren to life. Here's the really fun bit. Lúthien is based on this lady right here. This is Edith Tolkien, j.r.r.'s wife. Right, next is Galadriel, the Lady of the Wood. Even in The Lord of the Rings, Galadriel is shown as being pretty powerful. It talks about nothing crossing the borders of Lothlórien without her knowing about it. It talks about how after she left, the forest lost a lot of its beauty and strength because her mere presence was helping to maintain it. Let's take a deeper look, shall we? Galadriel is as old as all fuck. born during the years of the trees, which means this lady predates the sun and moon. She was born in Valinor, which is basically heaven, except it's different to human heaven. It's more like elf heaven and god heaven, but not human heaven, because that's how it works. She was the most beautiful, beautiful woman that ever fucking beautied. So much so that Feanor, the dickbag who invented the Silmarils, 3 times demanded 3 of her hairs so that he could make something out of them that probably would have caused a bunch of wars. And 3 times she said no, because even back then, Galadriel could tell if a person was a total fucking dickbag just by looking at them. Fast forward to a few millennia later, and Galadriel gives 3 of her hairs to a dwarf who only asked for 1, and even then only asked because he was pressed to ask. Why? Because Galadriel looked into him and saw that he wasn't a colossal dickbag. Galadriel was one of the head figures in the rebellion against the Valar, and led her people in a mass exodus from Valinor. Let me put that another way. Galadriel was one of the lead figures in a rebellion against the gods. She also had the good fucking sense to go nowhere near Feanor when leaving, so she didn't end up complicit in the kinslaying, because Galadriel knows what the fuck she's doing. And then, when literally everyone else in the world is shitting all over themselves to get at the Silmarils, Galadriel stays the fuck out of it because she thinks the whole thing is stupid and pointless. When Sauron rears his head again, disguised as Anatar the Gift Giver, pretending to be an emissary of the Valar, handing out fucking rings left and right, Galadriel is the only one who doesn't trust him. She gathers all of her people and she sets up base on the other side of a fucking mountain range. When Sauron finally forged the One Ring and revealed himself, Galadriel was one of the few people trusted to have the willpower and the inner strength needed to possess one of the elven rings of power. Let me rephrase that. She was one of the only 3 people in the entire world that everyone thought could probably resist the mental powers of a demigod. After the Battle of the Last Alliance, it was Galadriel who put together the White Council with the intention of cracking down on evil in Middle-earth. And when the Council went after the Necromancer at Dol Guldur, it was Galadriel who tore down the fortress's defences. Also keep in mind that in her marriage to Celeborn, it's pretty damn obvious that she's the one who calls the shots. He looks to her for approval, and it's by her will that Lothlorien is ruled. You could even say that Celeborn is a kept man. That's not even really scratching the surface in terms of badass Middle-earth ladies. Seriously, check out Melian and Haleth especially. You already know about Eowyn and Arwen, and trust me, Book Arwen is even more badass. But you should also look into Lobelia Sackville Baggins. She may be a hobbit and one of Bilbo's more annoying cousins, but she can fucking hold her own. The big problem is that even the Silmarillion is incomplete. Published posthumously after his death, the Silmarillion is really a collection of Tolkien's unfinished notes, collected and edited by his son, Christopher. Tolkien was kind of pressured into writing The Lord of the Rings. He never actually wanted to do it because he feared it would take time out of writing the Silmarillion. Which it did. 16 years of it, to be precise. So much of the history of Middle-earth was shaped and forged by the female characters who populated it. But there is still an issue with Tolkien not really including female characters in his narratives in any big way. It wasn't because Tolkien hated women. Tolkien had massive respect for women, to the point where he was terrified of writing them wrong. The reason why there's so little from a female perspective in Tolkien's work is not that he hated women, but because he kind of put them on a pedestal. There are no women in Tolkien's writing who are just okay. They're either incredibly powerful and evil, or they're incredibly powerful and beacons of virtue, almost, with the possible exception of Lobelia Sackville Baggins. This idea that women can't just be people. They always have to be ultimate virtue, ultimate beauty. It's still sexism. It's just a much less nasty form of sexism.